Okay, so today we're going to talk about the quadratic formula. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. And you are going to want to memorize that. And it looks really long and lots of letters everywhere. And I'm going to tell you just off the bat, this is not how I memorized it. It was not by saying it like how I just told you what it was. Most of you know the song Row, Row, Row Your Boat and are familiar with that. You can sing the quadratic formula to fit that, and in fact we will be doing that in class, so get ready. But for now I'll be the one idiot singing alone. And it's x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. And you just keep going through that, and trust me, you will memorize it. I don't even have to think for a minute what the quadratic formula is because my high school teachers had me memorize it like that. Okay? And why is this useful? Well, instead of completing the square or foiling, we can use this, and it works 100% of the time. So, foiling, sometimes we foiled and we got prime, and so that didn't really work for us to solve. And then, sometimes we did completing the square, but if you don't have nice squares, that doesn't work well. Quadratic formula is always there. It will always, always work and give you answers. So, let's start with an example. We'll take x squared minus 12x equals negative 20. Notice this is not in standard form. And we do want that standard form that's that ax squared plus bx plus c, okay? So to get standard form, we need to add the 20 to both sides. That should have a 12x, sorry. So when I add the 20 to both sides, I get x squared minus 12x plus 20 equal to 0. And that, again, is what standard form looks like. Then, and it is sometimes helpful if you label above your things A, B, and C, I'm going to start plugging into my formula. Of course, I always write my formula to start, so I have x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. And I'm going to start plugging things in. So that b is negative 12. So I have a negative of negative 12 plus or minus square root negative 12 squared minus 4 times a is 1. There's an understood 1 there. Times c, which is 20. Divided by 2 times 1. Okay, and now I can start simplifying this. So the negative of a negative is a positive 12, plus or minus. 12 squared is 144, minus 4 times 20 is 80, and that is over 2. Then I can do what's in the radical. And I say 12 plus or minus 144 minus 80 is 64 over 2. The square root of 64 is 8, so I have 12 plus or minus 8 over 2. And that's where I get to consider. I do 12 plus 8 is 20, divided by 2 is 10. 12 minus 8 is 4, divided by 2 is 2. And that's my answer. Okay? Let's try another one together, just so that we know what we're doing. We'll do 6x squared minus 12x plus 1 equals 0. So it's already in standard form. I am going to go ahead and label A, B, and C. And that way it makes it a little easier to plug into my formula. Of course, I do need to go ahead and write my formula. So I have negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. And then I can start plugging in. Again, that b is that negative 12 plus or minus the square root of negative 12 squared minus 4 times 6 times 1 over 2 times 6. Okay? And then I can start combining like terms and simplifying. So the negative of negative 12 is that positive 12 plus or minus square root 144 minus 24 divided by 12. When I subtract inside my radical, I get 12 plus or minus radical 120 over 12. And you know, we know our square roots, or our squares pretty well, which means we know our square roots pretty well. And 120 is not something we can take the square root of and get an even number. So the best we can do is kind of factor it down into its roots and primes. So 120 factors into 12 and 10. And we're creating that factor tree just like we've done before. 12 is 4 and 3. 4 is 2 and 2. 10 is 5 and 2. So I'm going to, anything that has a pair, I get to circle, and that comes outside the radical. So I have that 12 plus or minus 2 gets to come outside. And then all the lonely numbers stay inside. So 2, 3, and 5. And then I can multiply what's inside the radical. So I have 12 plus or minus 2 radical 30 over 12. And I kind of am starting to notice that I have two 12s and this 2. And all of those are divisible by 2. They're all even. So if I wanted, I could factor a 2 out on top, and then I'd have 6 plus or minus radical 30 over 12. I can cancel. That becomes a 1. That becomes a 6. So that my final answer would be 6 plus or minus radical 30 over 6. And I can leave my answer like that. That is what x equals. Okay? It doesn't have to be those nice round answers like we got on the first example, the 10 and 2. It can be much more like what we got here, just that 6 plus radical 30 over 6. You cannot cancel this 6 and this 6 because in the numerator, these things are added together, okay? So I'd have to factor that out just like I factored out that 2. That's why I didn't just cancel the 12s. I had to factor out the 2, and I was left with 6 plus or minus 30. Okay? One more thing before we move on completely. If you are asked to find the discriminant, the discriminant is just a piece of the quadratic formula, and it's what's inside the radical, the b squared minus 4ac. Okay? So sometimes you'll be asked to find the discriminant of something. That's what that is. It works out nicely usually. Let me go ahead and have you work this last example on your own. Our equation will be 3x squared plus 5x minus 12 equals 0. And I need you to find not just the discriminant, because that'll come naturally, but I need you to find what x equals. So go through the entire quadratic formula process. If you're following along with my work, I've done the formula, I've plugged in, and I've started simplifying. We know the square root of 169 is 13. And then I do -5 -5 plus 13 first, which is 8 over 6, and I can leave it as an improper fraction as long as I simplify it to 4 over 3. And then I do the -5 minus 13, which is -18 over 6. And -18 over 6 is -3. So my two answers are 4/3 and -3.